From Redox and Healthcare Strategy Bullpen, welcome to Diagnosing Healthtech.
Good afternoon. I am Jeff Englander. I am one of the co-hosts of Diagnosing Healthtech. I am the founder and principal of a firm called Healthcare Strategy Bullpen. It's my pleasure to welcome you all this afternoon. And with us today, I'd like to welcome my co-host, Torrin Slater, who is with Strategic Partnerships with Redox. Welcome, Torrin.
Thank you, Jeff. Great to be here.
So it is my pleasure to also welcome Michael Sanky. Mike is the global industry lead for healthcare and life sciences at Databricks. Mike focuses on unlocking the potential of data and AI in the healthcare industry, so that's definitely a full-time job. Mike joined Databricks from Optum, where he was the general manager of real-world data and analytics business, which included building and licensing Optum's commercial data products. Mike has an MS in marketing analytics from Bentley, and he has a BS in foreign service and international relations from Georgetown, and joins us from my hometown of Newton, Massachusetts. Welcome, Michael.
Thanks for having me. It's great to be here.
So our topic today is around data governance and AI. So first, can you tell me a little bit more about your role at Databricks, and then how you define data governance and it's important to the proper implementation of AI in healthcare?
Yes, we may need to break the second one down into some pieces, but yeah, we'll start with a bit of an intro. So Mike Sanky, I lead our go-to-market globally for healthcare and life sciences at Databricks. Databricks, we are the data and AI company. We have an enterprise technology platform, and fundamentally the platform that we've built is a horizontal technology platform. So really the role of my team is how do we extend that platform into common industry use cases and applications. And we do that through a variety of ways. One are technical solutions that we build. So we build open source projects that make it easier to work with certain data types on the platform. For example, we have one in genomics that's widely used in the drug discovery context. In the life sciences industry, we have others that are more healthcare specific around interoperable data types like HL7 and FHIR bundles that actually integrate very well into our partnership with Redox. So solutions is a big area. Another big area is around ecosystem. So we spend a fair amount of our time developing and cultivating the ecosystem of technology partners, consulting partners, data partners with solutions that are bespoke for industry. And Redox is a great example of that, with the connectivity into all of these critical source systems in healthcare. So those are the primary ways, sort of the ecosystem development and the solutions. And of course, we spend a lot of time with customers and ecosystem events, industry events. We recently were at HIMSS, which was a great event for us.
That's great, and very helpful. So can you help us, one of the crucial things in terms of data governance is kind of data stewardship, or earning the trust of the people whose data you're using and moving around. So can you just, talk a little bit about that and some of the things that you and Redox do to help ensure the data is secure and that you're working to earn and keep the trust of the people whose data you're using?
Yeah. So a few thoughts, and we certainly can go deeper. So our model is that we deploy our technology in the customer environment. So unlike other companies, we're never taking sort of receipt and ownership over an organization's data. And that's very important to us. And particularly as we talk about the sort of combination of data and AI, one of the things we often say is your data, your models. Because for any organization, data is their most strategic asset in many ways. And we're seeing every company become a data and AI company. And we want to give them a technology platform that enables them to manage their data within their own environment. So that is a sort of important foundational principle for us.
Okay, that's great. Torin, did you have a question?
No, I was just going to say, I think on the Redox side, kind of the complement to that is Redox obviously takes security very seriously. We have the highest level of high trust certification, SOC 2 Type 2 compliant, and all we do is healthcare integration. There's obviously a lot of nuances that are specific to the healthcare ecosystem, and I think both Redox and Databricks have made kind of heavy investments in that. I'm curious though, Mike, we think about data stewardship. I think another kind of like tangential topic related to that is around risk mitigation.
Mm-hmm.
I'm curious kind of what advice you have for healthcare executives to mitigate risk as it relates to leveraging all the power that AI yields.
Yes. So a few different thoughts on that. One is a lot of organizations come to us and they're trying to sort through the regulatory landscape. And the reality is there's a patchwork of regulations. I think depending on how familiar listeners are with the space, there was an executive order here in the US. Also, fairly recently, the EU passed the AI Act.
Right.
On top of that, there's a sort of number of states, I think in the dozens, that have issued their own legislation, many other bills at the state and federal level. And then even predating a lot of these regulations, there are other frameworks like NIST is one of those frameworks. It's actually an organization within the Commerce Department that has been putting forward standards around security as it pertains to AI. So I think there's a lot of regulations. There's a number of emerging frameworks. What we've done at Databricks is try to translate that as much to the application of developing AI models as possible. So we've recently released what we're calling the Databricks AI Security Framework. Highly recommend if you want to go deep. This is a 50+ page white paper that basically deconstructs risks associated with all the different components of building and maintaining AI systems, from the data prep through the model serving. There's more than 50 risks identified and recommendations for mitigating those risks. So, in terms of advice, I would say it's really having a good understanding of what those risks are, and also acknowledging that it's a complex pipeline. So it is not just training models. And I think the mistake some organizations make is they will functionally divide responsibility such that teams may be thinking of governance within their silo. So within model training, and then there's another team thinking of it, within model serving and deployment, and another team thinking of it within data prep. And that's the wrong way to go about it. You really need to understand the full continuum and manage those risks across the entire pipeline.
Did you have a follow-up, Torin?
No, that makes a lot of sense.
So Mike, one of the things we talked about a little bit in the prep call is kind of a framework to look at data governance and a couple of steps you could take, including some of the things that you referenced in terms of risk mitigation. So can you help outline, what would be some of the steps you would take as you build your data governance framework?
Yeah, so I think I typically try to sort of deconstruct things into their component parts. So the important components of governance, cataloging is a really important component of governance. You need to understand all of the different data assets that may be feeding a model, for example, and you also want to ensure that you have strong data quality around the data. And part of that is being able to document and really understand the provenance or the lineage of that data. So where it comes from, all the transformations that occur within that pipeline of data prep. So the lineage, it starts with cataloging data, but then the lineage is a really important component. of governance as well. So that's more on the data side. And we can come back to that if you want to dig into that in more detail. On the modeling side, a lot of it is around transparency. Mm-hmm. And at Databricks, we strongly embrace open source and open standards. That's been part of our sort of foundation as a company from the start. The founders of Databricks open sourced Apache Spark for distributed computing. And as a company, we've open sourced other technologies like Delta Lake and MLflow. So we have a long history of contributing to the open source community, and that has now extended into generative AI models. And we recently open sourced a model, DBRX, that is a fantastic foundation model that's open source. And the benefit of having open source models is that there's more transparency into things like the weights of the model. So it's not a black box where you're just sending, data out and getting an answer back and not entirely sure what's happened in the interim.
You talked about, cataloging or inventorying the data and then data lineage. Can you talk to, I was involved in a project moving data to the cloud in terms of the lineage, how important it is, or how do you help people understand where the data is and getting that single source of truth around how it's created, how it's labeled, et cetera?
Yeah. So we have a tool within our product called Unity Catalog that serves as that central data catalog and governance capability. And one of the unique things that we recently released are large language models running within our platform that will auto-describe the contents of tables and columns within those tables. So one of the big challenges is, if you're thinking of this as sort of an Excel spreadsheet worth of data, it may not seem like a massive problem, but the reality is the organizations we work with have enormous amounts of data across a variety of systems and different business applications. So it becomes infinitely more complex to manage all of that data in a cohesive manner and to even be able to find that data. So the benefit of having tooling that will automatically describe data is that it alleviates that burden of cataloging, which often gets pushed to the side, and then no one has any idea, what's in the data or what it means or where it came from. And any transformation you do to the data as part of your data engineering pipelines, those as well are automatically cataloged. And you can actually version and time travel between, different steps of your pipeline. So I think that it's the combination of the cataloging and the lineage that's built in, and then that lends itself to other applications. Like there's built-in search and discovery within the tool, so you can search across your enterprise for the catalog of data. You could govern that down in terms of access down to a row and column level, so you're able to protect identifiable patient information from individuals within your organization that shouldn't have access to it. So there's a lot of different components that extend from there. And another sort of interesting development in the context of AI are all the advancements around natural language querying. So once the data is cataloged, you can serve that essentially as a gold set of tables and enable non-technical personas or people like me who haven't been programming in a long time to ask in natural language questions of the data. So that's really powerful. All of the text to SQL, text to visualization type capabilities that foundationally require a good catalog.
And correct me if I'm wrong. So the catalog and the natural language processing, what I assume would help some of the people at your clients be more efficient and effective, in the sense that they may be able to do some things and leverage those tools to not have, so they don't need to be coders or data scientists to be able to access that. Is that correct?
That's correct. And the sort of big bet that we're making is Gen AI is a capability to transform the way that people interact with their data and they interact with their technology stacks. And the vision is that in a number of years, and these cycles are happening extremely quickly, technology platforms will be obsolete unless they have these capabilities that enable even non-technical personas to interact with data in meaningful ways.
So, and Torn, feel free to join in here on this one. Can you talk about how using the cloud, using tools like the Unity catalog and the NLP can make it easier and more effective to have data governance across your enterprise? How the cloud itself enables that, and Torrin,
Yeah.
I know from your experience at Redox, you know that as well. So any comments you have as well would be great.
Yeah. So the one of the big benefits of the cloud is essentially unlimited scale and the separation of storage and compute. So one of the challenges historically with governing data is that because of real technology limitations, it had to reside in different systems. And I think what the cloud has done is it's unlocked that because it can accommodate all different types of data modalities. And then what Databricks has been able to do with Delta Lake and Unity Catalog is actually manage and govern those different modalities. So if we think of a healthcare organization is going to have lots of structured data, meaning think of a typical database of row and column data, which could be, if you're a health plan, could be sort of member information as an example. You're also going to have large amounts of semi-structured data as well as unstructured data. So these are data modalities like clinical documentation, like image data, which we know is incredibly important, particularly in disease areas like oncology and neurology that really are driving a lot of the cost expenditures in healthcare today. So what the cloud combined with good governance and cataloging enables you to do is manage all these data modalities in a single unified platform where you're able to then bring all of the different tooling capabilities directly to that single copy of the data.
And I think to kind of build off of that, I agree with everything Mike said. Obviously, once the data is in the cloud, that's where you can really start deploying all the large language models and the governance structure on top of that. I think right now, one of the biggest barriers to, truly unleashing the power of the cloud and activating some of these Gen AI use cases are around how do you get the data in? And I think that problem is even more acute within the healthcare space because there isn't kind of a single governing data format, right? Each data source has its own unique data format, whether it's an EHR, a payer system, regional health information exchange, and getting the data in is a very non-trivial exercise in healthcare specifically. So I think, that's where kind of Redox and Databricks are partnering together, where obviously the underlying pipeline that facilitates that real-time bidirectional data exchange. And then, the Databricks tool set on top of that really enables executives to, build a AI strategy built on, security and governance. But I think getting the data in is something that often is somewhat overlooked, I think, in a lot of discussions, right? Like Gen AI data warehousing, that's only as powerful as the data that lives within the cloud. And getting the data into the cloud can be, its own project in and of itself.
Yeah, and it's to underscore that point, it's extremely complex in healthcare because healthcare organizations typically don't just have one system,
right?
Of data that they want to bring in, and even a given system with the same electronic health record vendor could have multiple different implementations of that system, and then you add on top of that practice management systems and all these other source applications. So what Redox is able to unlock is the connectivity to all these different systems to bring the data in, and it could be done in a matter of real time for streaming data for real time use cases. So in everything we talk about, hopefully you've heard this through our time already here today. We try to think of things as much in the end-to-end pipeline as possible, and it starts with getting the data and being able to govern it, manage it, catalog it, understand all those transformations, because any AI systems you build are only going to be as good as the data you put into them.
Let me follow up on Torrin's point, and I'll do it as a two-part question. One is, can you both talk about some of the challenges you've seen? You said it was a non-trivial task moving data into the cloud. So in general, can maybe, kind of healthcare specific examples, if you have them, of, what are some of the issues there? And then following up, can you talk about how important it is to have the bi-directional flow of real-time data and how important that is for healthcare? So I'll let you guys toss it up, whoever wants to start.
I can start. So yeah, I think on the challenges piece, Redox recently did some market research with a third party, and the findings were pretty, well, not surprising if you've been in healthcare, but maybe a little bit surprising if you aren't an expert in the area. But the majority of healthcare executives, primarily CIOs and CTOs, they lack the expertise as well as the capital to really be able to understand the nuances that exist within healthcare data. So so this might be a little bit too detailed, but each EHR is going to have its own configuration of HL7 as an example. So think of it, if you're not in healthcare, as having to be fluent in Mandarin, Spanish, German, and English, right? Unless you have a team that is fluent in all of those languages, it makes it really difficult to make sense of that data. And that's really the translation engine that Redox has built, is this data orchestration translation layer that consumes data across these disparate formats, normalizes it into a consistent source of truth, which in the context of Redox and Databricks is FHIR. And then, that makes it much easier for downstream implementation and additional processing. So that is the problem that Redox set out to solve 10 years ago. And it's what we continue to solve, is really, freeing teams to focus on innovating themselves and their own products, and let us deal with the hassles of healthcare integration. I can talk about the bidirectional piece in a second, but Mike, any other comments on that?
No, I think you summed it up well.
And then I think, where I get really excited is really on the bidirectional nature, right? So being able to leverage the power of the cloud, once it's in the cloud, is great if you're a data scientist, but providers are never going to touch, these cloud source systems. They're going to live and breathe in the systems that they're used to, which are, practice management systems, EHRs, and the like. So the next wave of, I think, innovation is going to come from being able to take those insights that have been derived within the cloud and sending that data real time back into the provider's fingertips, so that they can do kind of real time interventions at the point of care, which ultimately should yield, cost savings, and then most importantly, better patient outcomes. But that's, I think, the bidirectional nature is really where we'll start to see a lot of the true innovation, because that's really what's going to enable the providers to take advantage of a lot of the things that we've been talking about.
So, what I hear, is back up a step. So, as we all know, healthcare, on the information technology side has always been undermanned. It's always been, a very, difficult problem. Paraphrase an old boss of mine: never have so few done so little, done so much with so little. And what I hear you saying is some of the tools, such as the cloud, natural language processing, data cataloging, are all designed to help the IT folks at the specific, your clients, providers in general, be more efficient and effective. I just want to make sure I'm hearing that correctly.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, it's all about increasing productivity, driving costs, and then ultimately improving patient outcomes, and really making the data useful such that it can ultimately impact the patient in a more meaningful way.
And so one of the other things that, we talk about, we deal a lot with, operationalizing data and using it for, data analytics and insights. And one of the things I think that people overlook is it's not only getting all of this stuff set up, it's once it's set up, if you have different incoming data flows, it's making sure you have that governance and the provenance that, Mike mentioned. And can you talk just about how having things in the cloud and the whole system which you've outlined helps that.
I think it's really the tooling that helps it. The cloud helps with the elasticity and the scale, but just moving the data to essentially someone else's infrastructure versus something you maintain, it isn't going to solve it in and of itself. But the tooling you're able to bring to that to then manage that entire pipeline and orchestrate that pipeline. If you're doing it on a centrally governed copy of the data, you can orchestrate that end to end through both the data as well as any model transformations is what unlocks that. And the power of bidirectional data is you can put it back in the workflow. So not every initiative necessarily requires the insights to go back into the workflow. There's other things that you can do, like you can automate reporting, and a lot of the healthcare ecosystem in particular is sort of dependent on data sharing between partners and sharing data with regulators. So there's a lot of use cases in that regard. But in the context of clinical care, you need a means to actually push that back into the workflow, which means back into that source application.
Okay, that's very helpful. Torin, did you have a question, or is it just?
Yeah, I wanted to go back to one of the topics that Mike mentioned around kind of Databricks' philosophy about being an open source platform. I know you all have a desire to kind of democratize consumable data. Obviously, we've talked a lot about kind of the nuances that exist in healthcare, both from a regulatory standpoint and a privacy standpoint. What do you think are the current barriers right now that are kind of limiting that democratization of data within healthcare specifically?
Yeah, so there are a number of them. I think access to the data is one of them. There are source systems in healthcare that make it very difficult to take data out of that system, even if it's that organization's own data. And I think the Redox team is doing a great job at breaking down some of those barriers. But access to data is a big challenge in democratizing data. And then I would say the other component, it really comes in terms of the tooling and the also the talent in terms of data science skills to work with that data. Now, to some of our earlier conversation, tooling is going to solve some of those challenges because you no longer need to know SQL to interact with data. You can just know natural language to interact with data. But I think historically, as we look at the progression of this movement, we've had organizations that may have built large teams that know one proprietary system and unique coding language that struggle to work in a different system or a different language, and all these things sort of prohibit true democratization of data.
So, Torin, did you have a follow? Because I have one more I wanted to ask before we let Mike go and thank him very much for his time. But did you have a follow up?
No, I've another topic, but go ahead.
Okay. So, Mike, and you alluded to this earlier. How do the data governance and the catalog and provenance all help to give people confidence around the quote unquote black box issue, and help people understand better what's being done with the data? How can you speak to that in terms of particularly, as clinicians start to use it more?
Yeah. Well, even upstream of clinicians in the context of data analysis, one of the things large organizations struggle with is you have teams creating their own copy of the data because they want to do their own curation, apply their own business logic to it. And all of a sudden you have a proliferation of duplicative data with inconsistent rules, and people are getting different answers when they ask the same question, of the data. So that is one of the biggest challenges. And then it erodes trust. You have teams going upstream to source systems and trying to ingest their own data and shadow IT. So there's a lot that is accomplished by having a platform that enables the visibility, the transparency. Everyone's able to understand what sort of business logic rules were applied in curating that data, and they know how to use it and how to therefore interpret the data. So I think, yeah, a big part of it on the technical side is that transparency. And then I think in terms of the clinical side, it's really about having that two-way dialogue between the clinical teams and between the research teams. Because if you're a clinician, when you're entering information into a source application system like an electronic health record for a patient, your end goal typically isn't thinking about downstream research. You are treating that patient, you're trying to document information that's relevant to their care. There's other implications of that, of course. It serves as a means of auditing in terms of reimbursement. But there are core things happening in terms of that workflow and that documentation. And then all of a sudden, a team of researchers is trying to look at it to understand broader trends in population health and patterns of patients and readmission rates and all these other things. And I think it's critical that the researchers have an appreciation of how and why things were documented in a certain way, and that the clinicians have an appreciation of the end goals of the research and how it can ultimately help deliver better care to their patients. And if that dialogue doesn't exist, we talked about bidirectional data exchange. If that bidirectional dialogue doesn't exist, then it's a huge loss, and that's going to erode trust in what's happening with the data.
And any thoughts on how you encourage that if you don't see it?
I think it's one of these like organizational change management components, and the cross-pollination of technical teams with clinical teams is extremely important, and making sure that research teams have people who are in a clinical setting, if not still clinically practicing, is really important. I think one type of organization that has done this pretty well are academic medical centers, which tend to have some more of this cross-pollination to be able to take these insights and ultimately put them back into care delivery.
Okay, terrific. And before we let you go, because I do think Torrin said he had one more question, Mike, so my apologies. Go ahead, Torrin.
Yeah, Mike, I'm just curious to kind of wrap up, bring everything we've talked about and maybe make it a little bit more practical for some of the executives that may be listening. Based on everything we've said, obviously, this ultimately is going to translate to use cases and business value, right?
Mm-hmm.
So are there specific use cases that you're most excited about or that you're seeing kind of increased adoption of? And if so, would love to kind of get your feedback on that.
Yeah, so I'll share this example because I think it's a great example of the progression of value. And that's in the US, emergency departments have a regulatory requirement around reporting on emergency department wait time. It's known as NEDOCS. And typically, EDs are doing this manually. So you actually have staff, clinicians within the emergency department responsible for this. And it's something that can be fully automated. And we talked about HL7 V2 messages. It's one of these interoperable healthcare standards, although maybe I should put standards in air quotes. And it's exchanging information like every time a patient is admitted, discharged, or transferred from a facility, there's one of these ADT feeds that goes out. So you can actually fully automate this pipeline by parsing and ingesting and building a pipeline around these streaming ADT messages. Databricks actually created a solution accelerator specifically to address this. Redox handles any connectivity to source systems around this. So great use case to get started. It's operational in nature. It enables clinicians to operate at the top of their license, and you're able to just automate this operational workflow. Once you've done that, and we've seen organizations like Providence Health implement it, get the operational win, and then move on to more exciting data science use cases. Like they're actually able to triage ambulances based on the combination of emergency department wait time and proximity to that facility. They're able to take that foundation and predict patient throughput through the hospital and look at capacity planning. So they're actually measuring these transitions of care from the emergency department into the ICU, and they have an hourly occupancy forecast now within their emergency departments, which helps with capacity planning. So I think there's tremendous downstream opportunities that are unlocked once you're able to properly establish this foundation of data and governance.
Great, thank you.
It's super interesting. I think what we're going to be able to do both on the clinical and non-clinical side to help improve care and efficiencies. Well, thank you very much for your time, Mike. Really appreciate it. Incredible, but what's going on and the potential for what the future holds. So really looking forward to that. And hopefully we'll get to have you back again to give us an update.
Yeah, sounds great. Enjoyed the chat and being on. We'll catch you later.
Thanks, Mike.
Thanks very much.
Bye-bye.
So with that, what we'll do is we will move to our our discussion articles, excuse me. So there was a new ban on non-competes, which that was an article in Axios and the impact they could have on healthcare. So what happened is the FTC voted to ban non-compete agreements on Tuesday. It's important, particularly for healthcare, because a large share of doctors and nurses are impacted by non-competes. For example, only about 18% of the U.S. workforce is covered by non-competes, but Modern Healthcare estimates that approximately 40% of doctors are impacted by non-competes. In the ruling, the FTC estimated that they could cut healthcare costs by up to $194 billion, citing evidence that non-competes encourage consolidation and drive up healthcare prices. The FTC said there's a significant number of comments on the proposal actually came from doctors, and that these doctors, particularly ones in rural areas, argued that employers can force these agreements on the doctors and nurses, and these agreements generally pay lower wages since there are fewer options to work. In addition, the for-profit hospitals have argued on the other side that these agreements are necessary to recruit and retain workers, and the rule creates an uneven playing field since nonprofits aren't bound to it. In general, what I'd say is data from the Economic Policy Institute's estimates that non-compete clauses decrease worker pay by about 15%. There have been some issues where physicians enter into these non-compete agreements with hospitals to become an employed physician, thinking the grass will be so-called greener on the other side when it's really not, and then they're stuck and handcuffed in a restrictive agreement. I do think this will take a while to play out. Already been a lawsuit against it, and curious as to your thoughts, Torin.
Yeah, I agree with any new piece of legislation, there's always going to be a lag, right? So I do expect this to get tied up in courts. I think this is an interesting topic, particularly as it relates to healthcare. Obviously, on the health tech side, I think non-competes have historically been difficult to enforce, just given the pace of innovation is typically difficult to keep up with. Now, in the rural healthcare side, again, particularly in rural areas, I could actually see this having a pretty meaningful impact. My mother-in-law is actually a retired nurse practitioner who practiced in rural America for over 40 years. And I could see, her peers actually having, a pretty significantly improved quality of life and just additional optionality, as a result of this. Now, is that going to happen tomorrow? Probably not. But I could see it having a relatively outsized impact, particularly in those rural areas where the options are just fewer than they would be in a much larger city.
Yeah, and I also think that it'll be interesting to see how this does play out. I think it will take a while to play out, but there are a number of states. I think there are 4 states now which have these laws on the books. It's a question of how this all works its way through the courts, but I do think it's TBD, but I do think you may see some kind of lessening of the severity or enforcement of non-competes.
I'll also be curious to see kind of what impact, if any, this does have on the slowing kind of broader trend of consolidation within healthcare.
Yeah.
I know that was one of the points that was called out specifically in the article. This alone obviously isn't going to curb that trend, but it'll be interesting to see kind of if this does in fact have any impact there.
Absolutely. And our second article was on CMS capping broker payments and Medicare Advantage. This article was from Healthcare Dive. Basically, it said CMS has capped how much Medicare Advantage plans can compensate brokers in a bid to curb predatory pricing or predatory marketing. Under the rule, the compensation is defined as all actions associated with the sale or enrollment of a beneficiary in an MA plan. So insurers will no longer be able to pay brokers additional fees that aren't subject to the government's compensation cap. And it's an attempt by the government to stop brokers from steering beneficiaries into plans in exchange for higher reimbursement for insurers. It's interesting because roughly a third of MA beneficiaries use brokers to help them shop for plans according to the Commonwealth Fund. And CMS regulations establish maximums for the commissions they pay. It's usually $600, approximately $600 for an initial sale and $300 for renewal. But CMS hadn't set limits on additional fees such as marketing or health risk assessments. So brokers were making as much as $1,300 additional per enrollee. Patient advocates and regulators that argue that these financial incentives, plus the fact that brokers aren't required to inform consumers about all the plans available in their areas, were resulting in beneficiaries being steered to plans that aren't the best for their needs. This is also part of CMS's push to ensure that more than $65 billion in MA rebates aren't just being used for marketing. And we've talked about this in the past on the show, that you're seeing increasing regulation around MA. You're seeing, a much more greater focus both on the Hill and on CMS in terms of, HCC coding and upcoding. And you're starting to see it a little bit in some of the performance of the managed care plans. That's going to be, I don't think, quite as lucrative and a little more difficult to navigate for some of the managed care plans. What are your thoughts, Torrin?
Yeah, no, I agree. This is part of that kind of larger trend. I will say, I don't think this legislation alone is necessarily gonna reverse those preferred relationships that the brokers have with these payers. I think a lot of that is relationship based. Obviously, compensation is a big driver of that. But I'm curious to see kind of what impact this has, if any, on kind of how brokers navigate the plan selection process with their clients. I would love to see kind of additional focus on really making it easier for MA beneficiaries and just any Medicare enrollee to make an informed decision on their plan design. I think that's still, unless you have a background in healthcare like us, Jeff, I think that's still a very difficult decision. Both my parents are on Medicare. As I mentioned, my mother-in-law, she's on Medicare, and it causes way more stress than I think it necessarily needs to, just given the lack of transparency that exists. So I would love to see an increased focus on that. I think this is a step trending in that direction, and we'll be curious to see kind of how it pans out.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. I do think that you need, better education, better literacy, and better transparency. And I do think this is certainly a step in that direction. So with that, I will wrap it up. I do want to thank you, Torrin, for joining as a new co-host, and thank Mike, even though he's no longer here. So as I said, I'm the founder and principal of a firm called Healthcare Strategy Bullpen. We help payers, providers adapt and deploy healthcare tech to improve the lives of their patients. We help the innovators be more effective in developing and deploying their technology within the healthcare ecosystem. We really work around 4 areas. One is operationalizing data to maximize its analytical value. So I think that was a lot of the conversation today. Helping demonstrate the benefits of new applications enabled by digital health, applying digital health to high cost and chronic conditions, and also helping individuals and helping innovators and payers and providers gauge them and manage the practical, cultural, and technological issues around the social determinants of health. Please check out our website for the RPM Market Landscape Report, which we publish with Redox. It's available at the website, which is healthcarebullpen.com. Please follow us on Twitter at healthcarepen, on LinkedIn, and please look for the report under the podcast and webcast page. And we look forward to seeing you at the next webcast in 2 weeks, where we will have Trip Hofer, who is the CEO of Redox, on. And with that, I will turn it on over to you, Torrin.
Awesome. Thank you, Jeff. Just as a reminder to our listeners, our show is sponsored by Redox. We are the source and destination agnostic healthcare integration platform that specializes in the implementation of big data, AI, and cloud computing. I also wanted to just quickly tease an upcoming white paper that Redox and Databricks will be releasing together, focused on many of the topics we discussed today. So AI governance is the topic. It'll be filled with lots of really practical insights for any healthcare executive, focused on really how to leverage a data governance strategy for better, more secure outcomes with AI. That white paper will be available on the Redox website. That's redoxengine.com/resources. And then lastly, as Jeff mentioned, just wanted to encourage everyone to subscribe to Diagnosing Healthtech. You can do that on any podcast platform, as well as scan the QR code that you see there on the screen to get updates. So thank you again from all of us at Diagnosing Healthtech. We appreciate you watching and look forward to seeing you next time.
Take care.